strange deaths, scary experiences, and an alleged serial killer in Byron Bay, and yet nobody has talked about this until now, and it has been happening for decades. You see, many survivors have recently come forward detailing their experiences with a loose serial killer in Australia, and a member of their parliament has since confirmed that this is in fact happening, and a lot of these victims are not able to speak out because they are missing or murdered. In fact, there are 67 women who cannot speak out for themselves. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Makenna, and today's case is one that I have uncovered through different TikToks of people in this area talking about their own experiences, and I fell down this rabbit hole that I want to deep dive with you into, because there are not only cases going back to the 1970s, but there are cases as recently as a few years ago that are still occurring. And these TikTok survivors are saying that just this year, last year, they have had these experiences. So we are going to dive into all of that, the missing, the murdered, the survivors, the TikToks, and all of the insane cases that might have a connection here that a lot of people say police are doing nothing about. Now, make sure you are signed up for the Genuine Gem newsletter. All you have to do is type in your email, and I will not spam you. This is just so that I can send you personally my videos, and we don't have to rely on the YouTube algorithm, which sometimes gets it wrong. But if you want to catch up with me on personal things, I do have a vlog channel, Brooke Makenna Vlogs, as well as a vlog TikTok, and I have an Instagram for personal use and true crime use if you would like to follow me other places. Now let's get back to the story. So Byron Bay, New South Wales, Australia was known to be a very laid-back place for locals and tourists alike, unlike the stories on social media that began to surface. This was believed to be a tropical paradise, a getaway, but many of these survivors were being called dramatic by the locals looking for 15 minutes of fame because they were talking about how dark and sinister this place might really be. But it has recently been revealed that police have known about this possible serial killer in the area for decades. 67 women have been found to have gone missing or have been murdered between 1977 and 2009. Many may have been the victim of a serial killer or serial killers. In fact, a member of the Australian Parliament, Jeremy Buckingham, spoke to Parliament in October of 2024 about a list of over 60 women, including 17 from the Newcastle area, all with their crimes unsolved. He told Parliament that the crimes had not been given proper focus by the police, and to him, there was a serial killer operating on the north coast of New South Wales, or serial killers. He said that the worst serial killer in the nation's history had gotten away with it. He said that some of these were individual incidents, there was no doubt about that, but there were many that could have been linked to a single perpetrator. That some of the killings were among the most violent, most egregious imaginable, and some of these women had been dismembered and others brutalized. He said that the SA, torture, murder, dismemberment is incredibly uncommon in crimes, and to find it repeatedly across the North Coast is incredibly alarming.
Worst serial killer in the nation's history has gotten away with it. Ivan Milat was convicted of 7 murders. There is someone on the North Coast that has murdered as many or more, and they are still amongst us if they haven't died or fled the country. The worst crime in our state's history is unresolved. In an age when we are trying to stamp out violence against women, violence in our community, we must hold those the police to account for their failures in this area. We must acknowledge that this is an absolute anomaly, an appalling anomaly, and has every indication that someone operated in that area, travelled that area, lived across that area, and took women, destroyed their bodies, destroyed their lives, is a stain on our society.
However, the premier, Chris Min, rejected the call for a special commission to inquiry this incident, stating that this was the job of the homicide detectives, not of the government. But the Member of Parliament, Buckingham, then motioned for the police to release certain files on these cases within 21 days, but that was going to prove difficult due to a lot of them still stating that they were ongoing investigations. Now, when this all came out, a TikTok had already gone viral. This was of a girl named Kaylee who had posted about her experience surviving an attempted kidnapping at Byron Bay weeks prior to this announcement. She had explained that in August of 2024, she had been on holiday in Byron Bay. She was walking along the road to Suffolk Park towards the beach. She claimed that she was alone at this time and she saw a car pull up and slow down next to her. And what happened next, she would describe as feeling like she was hunted for sport. At first, she had just posted a video of herself with the words, "Experiencing a traumatic event on the way to the beach, but trusting the ocean will heal me," written on it. And the caption said, "Trying to have a relaxing holiday, but almost getting kidnapped was not very relaxing." And she tagged New South Wales. But when someone in the comments asked her what had happened, she wrote, "Long story short, a man was stalking me on my 5-minute way to the beach, and I only knew because some witnesses had my back and made sure I was safe." Now, as a follow-up to this, Kaylee actually posted a TikTok response to a comment saying, "I live here and the whole town knows you're a joke." She was speaking about how the locals don't really care about your safety in Byron Bay, and she began showing a whole bunch of very similar comments.
If you're planning on traveling to the Byron Bay region of Australia, then I think you should know how little some of the locals care about your safety. I shared about a close encounter that I had with a man in Byron, and it's weirdly really upset some of the locals, and not in the way that you would think. Pause to read some of the comments that I've received on Facebook. This one is concerned for his fellow men who might be wearing gloves and following women down the street. I retracted this guy's name because he at least had the decency to issue me an apology after I was like, what the heck? This obviously isn't representative of everyone. There have also been a lot of locals that have been really beautiful, and they've reached out to me and shared similar experiences. They've tried to help me in tracking down footage of the incident, and I really appreciate that. Like, this is not across the board. Everyone in Byron sucks, but a lot of y'all do. What I've learned from the last few days of listening to other people's experiences and researching crimes and disappearances in the area is that there is a serious problem going on up there.
But Kaylee would state that she was walking around Suffolk Park on August 31st, and this was around 3:40 to 3:45 p.m. It was broad daylight. She was going to meet up with her friends who had gone prior to the beach because this walk from where they were staying to the beach was very short. So as she was walking, she was very aware of her surroundings, but then this couple in the car slowed down right next to her. They looked terrified, and they were also looking behind her. And so that is when Kaylee turned around. She looked behind her and saw a strange man. Now, this was a gut feeling, but it also was the fact that this man was dressed not for the hot weather. He was wearing a hat, sunglasses, and gloves. And so Kaylee instantly felt terror.
We were staying 10 minutes away from Byron in a place called Suffolk Park, which is also like a tourist destination. We wanted to go to the beach, and the friends that I was with were ready before me. So I was like, just go on ahead. It's literally like the same street. Like the end of the street of where we were staying was the beach. So I was like, oh, it's like a 5-minute walk. So I'll be totally fine to catch up with you guys. 10-20 minutes after they had left, I was ready to go. I text my brother and my fiance while I was on the walk and was like, I'm on the way to the beach. Like, I felt fine. It was 3:45 on a Saturday afternoon. It was sunny out. It was bright. Once I texted them that I was on my way, I put my phone back in my bag. I like to be like quite aware of what's going on around me, especially if I'm alone. As I'm walking, there is a car that pulls up like on the other side of the parked cars to me. They're in the middle of the road. I look into the car and it's a young couple, and the woman in the passenger seat, she's looking at me and then she's looking behind me at something, and she looks terrified. And I was like, what on earth is going on? So I look behind me to see a man a couple of meters behind me. And this man does not look dressed for where we are. It's like 30 degrees and he is in gloves. For that man to be as close to me as he was, he had to have run up on me because I had already been checking behind me because I'm just like that type of person. As soon as I look at him, he disappears either like down this side street or like into somebody's front yard. I wouldn't have even noticed this man if not for the fact that the couple in the car were distressed and they'd pulled over. Every single part of me felt like that was a really, really close encounter with something really evil. It didn't shake the feeling that the universe had split off a little bit. Like there's a timeline in which I didn't notice that man and the exact car that was driving past at that time that stopped wasn't there. My partner was back home in Victoria, and it's really, really weird that at the exact same time that all of this was happening, he kind of just like felt a little bit weird and was like, oh my God, like imagine if something happened to her while she's away and I just never get to see her again. Which is kind of like a weird thing to be thinking at the time of this occurring. Now, I don't know if that man was actually there to kidnap me or something else, but that man was definitely there with me as his target for whatever he had intentions for. Thank you to that couple. I have no idea where I would be or what I would be up to if not for you.
And the couple then watched her as she walked all the way down to her friends to make sure she was safe. So when it was finally released by Parliament that these 67 women had gone missing all in the same area, Kaylee posted an update saying that she started tracking the missing and murdered prior to that announcement on a map, which she shows in her TikTok, and I'll show that to you. And she actually had her own list of victims and was then adding to her list the list of people who had been announced. So her list contained men as well as cases that were after 2009. And so
I actually started tracking a bunch of these last month when I found out about all of these cases. And I made a map trying to connect everything. You can see I started in Byron and Suffolk area, which is where I was. And then it goes all the way up, like past Tweed Heads to Southport, and then like all the way down as well. So I added their list to mine. And I was like, oh. And you can just see it's huge. Like combining both of them, there's 82 people on this list that have either turned up dead or have been missing. And that's so freaky. Personally, I do not think this is the work of one single person. I don't think that's possible. I don't know if it's multiple serial killers or if it's like a large organized group. But the way that my report was handled and the way that a lot of people in Byron felt about it or talked about it made me feel like there's a lot of people that like know a lot more than they are letting on.
And she spoke about how the man who had run up on her seemed very experienced, like he had done it before. She also explained that the police were extremely unhelpful when she was trying to just make her report. And you'll find that this is a constant in these cases. But upon this information being released publicly, the New South Wales police then dismissed the claims of a serial killer, stating that they have investigated these disappearances and murders, and to this date, there was no evidence that a common offender was responsible. The first case was actually dating back to 1977 with the disappearance of 21-year-old Narelle Cox, who vanished from Grafton, which is very close to Byron Bay. Now, Narelle wanted to be a nurse. She was actually waiting to hear back from Darwin Hospital where she was applying, and while she waited, she had gone to visit her friend Faye in Grafton. So Narelle was staying with Faye for a while, often hitchhiking to get around, which was very normal at this time. But Narelle had told her mother when she was planning on coming home. And when she didn't arrive, that is when her mother sent her a telegram to find out what was going on. And of course, this was sent to her friend's home, Faye. That is when Faye would respond saying that she had not seen or heard from Narelle. So her family rushed to Grafton police to report her missing, and the police really didn't seem to care. They said she was an adult, didn't believe it was that serious, and so the family left them with a photo of Narelle, a description of her, and the police stated that they would tell all of the nearby police departments about what had happened, that she was missing, so that they could be on the lookout for her. So the family believed that an investigation was happening. But after weeks of no news, they were driving all over the area and they got to Brisbane, which was about 3 hours away, and they went to the police department and were told that they had never been told about Narelle. Now, this was 6 weeks after she had vanished, and her mother then went back to the Grafton police and really got into their face about their negligence, and that is when they put an article in the paper. Now, this is when a tip came in from a man in Lawrence, which was about 24 minutes from Grafton. He said that he had been out fishing when he had pulled a girl's body on his anchor, but he was in shock, so he let it go. Now, this river was dragged, but nothing was found. The fisherman said that he saw blonde hair, and he described the clothes, and these did not match Narelle. But there was also a truck driver who allegedly came forward to her family saying that he had picked her up at the South Grafton Crossroads and gave her a ride to Brunswick Heads. He talked to the family, but he wouldn't talk to police, saying he wanted to stay anonymous. A year later, Narelle's family finally got a knock on the door, and 2 police officers would tell them that she had been found, that she had registered for unemployment in Sydney. So Narelle's grandmother, who lived there, went to that office, and due to her and her disappearance, they actually gave her the paperwork that Narelle had allegedly filled out. But unfortunately, the activity on her account that had just been flagged had actually been from a year prior to when she vanished, when she was living in Sydney. Her family said that there was no apology from the police after that. And in 2005, the case was actually reopened by the coroner, who was shocked to find how the case had been handled with the lack of follow-ups and the absence of the original file. But after this, the case was closed with no answers. The New South Wales Police also stated that among those 67 missing on their list was Robyn, Hickie, and Amanda Robinson, who vanished in 1979. They vanished the same month of April of that year. Robyn Hickie was 18 and she had left her home on April 7th and was last seen standing at a bus stop at Belmont North. And then on April 21st, 14-year-old Amanda was last seen walking down the road leaving her high school in Gateshead. These areas were only 7 minutes apart, and for years, neither of these girls were located. Eventually, an inquest found that both girls were likely deceased, and likely it was as a result of foul play. Police believed their murders were linked. And then in 2021, after 40 years missing, the police increased their reward for information to $1 million. And that is also when a strike force began investigating or reinvestigating and honed in on a Scouts fundraiser that had taken place nearby where Amanda had last been seen. Now, investigators knew during their initial investigation that Amanda had gone right past this location where the Scouts fundraiser had been. And police would find that one of the men at this fundraiser was a registered sex offender, Warren McCorriston. While they didn't have evidence that Warren was a part of these girls' disappearances, he would actually be jailed in 2021 for brutally SAing 2 women between 1980 and 1997. And then in 2024, due to the investigation into him for Robyn and Amanda, the task force actually uncovered evidence to charge him in a different 1980 abduction. He was 62 years old at the time that he was arrested, and he was charged with the abduction when he would have been 16 years old. This was a girl in Lake Macquarie, New South Wales in 1980, and she had gone to the police saying she had been kidnapped and injured, but she had survived. He then officially became a suspect in the disappearances of Robyn and Amanda, but he has still not been charged in that case and is awaiting trial for the 1980s abduction that he has pled not guilty to. But this task force also found that at that same Scouts fundraiser where Warren McCorriston was, there was also a man named George Cecil who was the leader, and he would later be jailed for possessing child abuse material. He has since passed, so they could not question him. But also, one of the men at this fundraiser was driving a green 1970s Holden Torano, last seen driving around that area. And so the police released photos of this car as well. They believed that someone at this fundraiser could have been responsible for Robyn and Amanda's disappearances. And on top of that, they also had their own theory that there was a ring working around this area at the time. So the scout camp ended up being searched for remains, but nothing was found. Now, while we don't know every single one of these 67 cases, we do know a few, and 10 years after Robyn and Amanda vanished in 1989, 33-year-old Susan Maree Kiely was missing. She was a mother of two who vanished without a trace from Bellingen on December 1st of 1989. Her two daughters and her husband were in court for an inquest decades later, where it was revealed that Susan was actually separated from her husband, had taken her youngest daughter to live with her in a small cottage. She was unemployed, and so she often relied on hitchhiking for transport. Now, this is important, and you will hear that a lot of these people were either walking, taking the bus, looking for a ride, or hitchhiking. That day, Susan had put her daughter on the bus at 8:30 that morning. She had then been picked up and she was hitchhiking, but these were locals who had dropped her off in town, and they stated she was in very good spirits and told them she was spending the day with friends. So between 11 a.m. and 1:30, she was at a friend's house. She stayed between 30 minutes and 90 minutes, and her friends believed she was either going to the bank or the pub after that, but she's not been seen since. Now, a week later is when her husband reported her missing, and he told police that he believes she overdosed on drugs while with her friends and that they had disposed of her body. Her body was never found, though. So during the inquest, the court heard that her husband, Robert Smith, had motive to kill her, that she was seeking full-time custody of the children and to be paid $35,000. The inquest determined there was not enough evidence to determine what happened to her, and Sarah's brother was very unhappy with how his sister's disappearance had been investigated from the start. But then the New South Wales Police spoke about their unsolved investigation into the 1994 disappearance of 16-year-old Gordana Kotevski. On November 24th of 1994, she had been forced into a car around 9 p.m. in Charlestown when she was walking to her aunt's home. An inquest found that she too was likely deceased and likely as a result of foul play. So this would have been 5 years after Robyn and Amanda's disappearances and only 5 minutes away. Her aunt said that Gordana was a joyous, innocent young girl, and then she was gone and she was never located. Then in 2003, 18-year-old Rose Howell vanished on April 11th. She was walking in Repton towards Bellingen around 6:15 p.m. She was going to meet friends. She most likely hitchhiked, and it wasn't unusual for her to spend the night at one of her friends, so her mom didn't report her missing until 2 days later. She was known to be a strong, independent girl in her prime. She was excited for her upcoming birthday party. An anonymous letter also came in shortly after her disappearance stating that she had gotten in a car on the highway. And an inquest would find that she likely died, but the date, place, and cause was undetermined. Her bank card and her phone has had no activity since. Then in 2006, 25-year-old Daneeka Nixon was reported missing to Byron Bay police because she was last seen leaving the Shannon, which was in a location that often had parties. She was at this dance party, and she left appearing to be disoriented. Friends then noticed that her car was still parked on the property that Monday, and her keys, purse, and phone was inside. 4 days later, on April 20th, her body was actually found in a dam on the property. However, drug use was ruled out in her death, and the coroner was unable to determine the manner of death or the cause of death. And her friends stated she was a good swimmer and surfer, and they questioned how she could have drowned on her own. But many of these disappearances or abductions and possible connections between them have been forgotten over the years, or at least it seems. The locals are said to be very aware of this possible serial killer, But until recently, with the member of parliament speaking out about it publicly, a lot of the other citizens of Australia had no idea. So this is when many began to talk about their own experiences on social media that they had had in Byron Bay, and Laura Claire took to TikTok to talk about her terrifying experience in 2008. She was 21 years old. She decided to hitchhike from Byron Bay to Suffolk Park, which was about a 10-minute journey. Her friend got in the back of a car who stopped for them. She got in the front, and that's when she saw a huge knife on the passenger seat. It was rusty, it was gross, and she said she was very naive, so she asked if she could just move it so she could sit. She then asked what the knife was for, and he said that he was a chef. She only began to have these red flags when she asked where he worked, and he said he didn't have a job.
So there's a serial killer on the loose in Byron Bay, Northern Rivers area, and it was just announced publicly yesterday. But if you're local, you've known about this for quite a while. And it reminded me of a close call that I had when I was living in Byron that I haven't thought about for years. Because I was trying to rack my brains about who I would know that could possibly murder a bunch of women. So this van pulls up. I put her in the back because I'm like, I'll go in the front. Like, I'm going to sit with the guy up the front. He's in his 30s. So I slide the back door shut, go to jump in the front, and there is a big knife on the front seat. And instead of getting the fuck out of there, I'm like, hey, do you mind if I just put this on the floor so I can get in? Lily has heard that I've just put a knife on the floor. She's freaking out in the back, but I have no idea because she's behind me. And I just don't have any fucking spidey senses. Like, no red flags going off for me, right? I just moved a massive knife onto the floor that might be our murder weapon, but no red flags. So I was like, okay, if one of us makes it out alive, at least we'll know where he works, so, and also where not to eat. So I was like, where do you work? He's like, oh, I'm not working at the moment. That was when I knew I needed to get out of the van. I knew I was lying. He knew I was lying, but I was like, that's us, just there. Oh my God, amazing. Thank you so much. And he pulled over and let us out. And that was that. He could have just been like a really nice guy that was an unemployed chef with a really rusty knife, or he could have been a murderer.
But in her next video, Laura Claire spoke about how she lived in Byron for 12 years and the Byron police did not do a good job of keeping people safe. She spoke about how she wasn't listened to by the police and someone ended up murdered in Byron because of that.
As someone that's lived in Byron and has personally dealt with a murder that was avoidable, I went to the police. I was treated like I was being hysterical, belittled, and then someone got murdered, and then it was our information that got them caught. So I don't really have faith in the police work of Byron Police. There is a possible serial rapist that targets foreign women that aren't going to stick around and press charges. I have had friends that have been raped in Byron. I've had friends that have had their drinks spiked in Byron.
She said that she'd gone to the police saying she was threatened by a man who said he was going to kill her at her work, and they did nothing. But 2 days later, he did kill someone. It was just someone else. However, he was found not guilty of murder on the grounds of mental illness.
So I need advice. I know someone who has murdered someone who has been released back into the community in Byron, and I want to know what the ramifications are if I name them. And if I can, because I would like to, I think people should be warned because I think this guy will murder again.
Now that's when Laura decided she needed to leave Byron Bay because it felt unsafe. She said it's a beautiful place, but there is such a dark underbelly of crimes against women, and men are also being targeted. It was a place that has lots of rehabilitation centers for those with addictions. She said that people would often relapse there and be struggling with the addiction, the mental illness, which adds to the lack of safety. A year after Laura's scary experience, in 2009, Jasmine Morris vanished. She was 19 years old. She was last seen on October 6th of 2009. She was described as a beautiful girl who had matured into a lovely young woman, but she had fallen into drug and alcohol abuse, and she began hanging out at an all-night service station where she would meet truck drivers to hitchhike. An inquest found that she likely died on or around the date of her disappearance, but the coroner was unable to determine how or where. She was never found. Now, while the Member of Parliament has only spoken about 67 missing in the Byron area until 2009, many more strange disappearances and murders have been reported since then. In fact, in 2019, an 18-year-old named Theo Hayez vanished from Byron Bay. He was a Belgian man who was backpacking, and he had gone to the Cheeky Monkeys nightclub on May 31st of 2019. Around 11 p.m. is when he left. Theo had arrived in Australia back in 2018 on a working holiday visa, and he was actually scheduled to fly home at the end of May, but vanished a week before his flight. Now, his family ended up calling the New South Wales police on June 6th of 2005, 5 days later, when he didn't make it back home. And the Wake Up hostel where he had been staying also called the police that day because he had failed to check out for 3 days. They found his passport was still in his room. His parents then flew to Australia to help in the searches, and his mother said that she had warned him not to jump off cliffs and to be careful, and Theo reassured her that he wouldn't. He would be safe. He had actually gone to Australia to be with his godfather, and he had then traveled to Byron Bay by himself on May 29th to just visit for a little bit before going home, but 2 days later, he was missing. So on the 31st, he had arrived at the bar at 9:45 p.m. and he was asked to leave at 11:03 p.m. They were telling him that he was approaching intoxication, but that was strange because he had only actually had 2 drinks, which was shown on CCTV. He was banned from any other bar, so he had to leave his friends that he had made there behind. Theo was last seen on the CCTV leaving the nightclub. He was looking at his phone, walking down the road. He didn't appear disoriented or that intoxicated at all. Now, Australian police told his family they were unable to get into his accounts on his phone to access his records and his GPS data because, of course, he hadn't been found, his phone hadn't been found, but they could look into the accounts and the records. So because they couldn't do this, the investigation was at a standstill until his mother found out his password. She guessed it, figured it out, got into his accounts, and they were able to find that after he got kicked out of that bar, Theo had searched on his phone for directions to the Wake Up hostel. He checked it 8 times, but then he started walking the wrong way. He was walking when he came up to what was called the cricket nets, and he stopped there for about 7 minutes. It was unknown what he did at this location, but then he started walking towards Tallow Beach, which is still in the opposite direction of his hostel. Now, he did not put in the maps for Tallow Beach for directions, even though he did not know this place that he was at. He still took a very suburban path and then into the bush, which was not a usual path to see and one that only locals would really know. Now, his family believed he couldn't have done this alone, and he was also walking very confidently. He wasn't hesitant. He was walking with a purpose, as though he was following someone who knew where they were going. Along this trail, when investigators retraced it, his gray Puma hat that was similar to what he was last seen wearing was found at Tallow Beach by searchers, but his body was not. Now, his phone last pinged at Cape Byron on June 1st around 1 p.m., the day after he vanished. So it had continued to ping for another 12 hours after he had gotten to that beach. Google suggested that his last whereabouts were near Cozy Corner, Tallow Beach, which is actually right under where a famous lighthouse is found. It's known to be very difficult to get to in the dark, but Theo did go up into the bush that was nearby for about 5 minutes. It was believed he was trying to find a way and he couldn't find it. So he went back to Cozy Corner Beach, and that is where he switched off his GPS data. But he was still answering texts, and he was even watching a show on YouTube. The last text he sent was actually at 1 a.m. on WhatsApp, and he said, yes, so much so, to being asked if it was surfer's paradise. Now, Australian investigators knew that this beach was known for parties, and he was sitting on this big rock on the beach where his phone was last tracked, but his phone was still never found. And so Theo's father ended up making a plea to the Australian people to help, saying that he promised Theo, his little brother Lucas, that he would bring his brother home, and he needed help from them to keep the promise. Police began to say they believe Theo had fallen from the cliffs near the lighthouse as a misadventure. He was lost, misdirected by Google Maps, under the effects of drugs and alcohol, and he fell into the sea or was possibly even suicidal. His mom actually feels a lot of guilt about this time period because she believed what the officers were telling her, even though she knew that her son wouldn't have taken his life. She just wanted to believe the least horrible theory and to know what happened. But 6 weeks later, the Australian police were ending the search for Theo Hayez. 5 days after that, though, a forensic psychologist, Tim Watson Monroe, stated that he believed Theo had been a victim of an unknown serial killer, along with two 20-year-old backpackers who had vanished a month prior to him in the area. 2 years later, an anonymous tip would come in to a PI who was working on Theo's case. This was in 2021, and a tipster had overheard a conversation at a Byron pub where two people were quizzing, or more like interrogating, a man about a missing Belgian backpacker. They asked this man, "Where is he then? You are a bunch of dogs if you don't tell anyone where he is." The next day they were back, and this man admitted that he dumped a body in dense bushland in Byron. And he also claimed that the victim's belongings had been dumped at a squatter's house in Nimbin. So the PI was led to this dilapidated house in Nimbin. They went to search and found broken floorboards, smashed glass, and they discovered belongings, but not of Theo, of a woman named Thea Little. This was a woman whose remains had actually been found a year prior, and these belongings were letters addressed to her. The 52-year-old had last been seen between Byron Bay and Tweed Hills in October 2019, 5 months after Theo had vanished. She was a former microbiologist and found herself homeless before she vanished. But the PI had allegedly identified 20 people of interest, saying that these are the kind of people that Theo could have run into if he was met with foul play, that they had violent histories, mental health issues, and they were using drugs. Now, that same year in 2021, an inquest was held in Theo's death, and State Coroner Teresa O'Sullivan reported that the theories that Theo had either taken his life or staged his disappearance could now be excluded. But she couldn't exclude the other two theories, that he either died alone while trying to climb to the lighthouse, or he was killed by another person or persons who disposed of his body. She stated that his family believed that Theo climbing up this lighthouse onto this cliff in the darkness alone is completely inconsistent with his character. And it was reported in the inquest that there was no signs of pre-existing conditions, that Theo was at risk of death by suicide. He had no troubles legally, personally, financially, and he also was not said to be heavily intoxicated. A $500,000 reward has been posted, and his family said that they have no proof that he is dead, so they still have hope. They also claim that there was an obvious lack of resources in the police force, and that's something that needs to be worked on. But that's not where the strange disappearances and deaths end, because in 2021, 25-year-old Jackson Stacker was traveling around Australia in his van given to him by his grandfather. He was a backpacker who had set out from Melbourne in 2020 after finishing his apprenticeship as an electrician. He was then traveling for the next year, and he told his family that he was on a journey to find himself, and he was enjoying a very alternative, non-materialistic lifestyle. And by July of 2021, he was going to actually head back to Queensland for a music festival. However, the state's borders were closed, so he was caught in that Byron area for a little bit longer. A month later, by August 23rd, his van would actually be found abandoned at a rest stop 30 minutes north of Byron. Another man traveling in his own van had taken a destitute man to see Jackson at his van. They claimed that they found the keys in the ignition, and the whole van looked as though it had been tossed over. The destitute man then went through the van and stole a digital camera to sell. They also found Jackson's ID in his van. And that day was the same day his parents would know something was wrong, because his father would get a call from a woman who claimed that she wanted to buy this van. She found his number on the registration papers. But Jackson was not a part of that at all. So 2 days later, the police search for his body would come to a devastating end, because his body was found nearby where the van had been parked under a tree in a field. This was around 400 feet from the van, and he would have needed to climb over 2 fences and wade through a creek to get to this isolated area from his van. His remains were skeletal and they were scattered. He was face down wearing one of his favorite faux fur coats, but his scalp and dreadlocks were away from his body and he was missing teeth. Now his boots were even farther away from his body and they were also unzipped, but he had an 18-centimeter hunting knife through his chest. And nearby there were 2 cigarette lighters, matches, a container of gear oil, duct tape, a beanie, and a vape. Now his phone was not located but last pinged back on August 2nd, about a month prior. Though it was found he was actually last seen alive on July 22nd and he was believed to have died the next day. A week after he was believed to have died, his phone actually rebooted near Grafton, 2 hours south, and for the next 4 days connected to various cell towers before returning to the Byron area where it stopped pinging on August 2nd. Now at first police were suspecting that he had taken his own life due to the hunting knife, and then they began to find the death suspicious. An autopsy would find that he had been dead and exposed to the elements for about a month, leading investigators to believe that the day his phone last pinged on August 2nd was around the time that he had died. So this case was classified as suspicious, and the forensic pathologist Noel Wolford stated that due to the decomposition of the body and the lack of soft tissue, it was not possible to say definitively if this knife was self-inflicted or by an assailant. However, the knife was used with considerable force. But the body parts being separated were not necessarily evidence of foul play. He said that due to the decomposition, little force would be required to actually remove the skull from the other remains, and that could have been done by an animal. Now, a man named Kaylee Whitehead stated that he was friends with Stacker once he had gotten to Australia, and they had met at one of the car parks where the vans would sit. They would smoke together, and Callan said that Stacker was a really cool, really chilled guy who loved life, and there was a stoner crew that was always around his van. But Callan said in his last few days, Jackson has been very upset and depressed, and he actually left a party at a casino after taking LSD, and he started crying. Callan said the last day he saw Jackson let out an enormous scream throughout the park and then threw a bike into the sea. Callan said this could have been because there was a little kid riding around in this bike, crashing into people's cars and scratching it. But as Jackson drove away from the rest stop that day, he was wiping his tears. And so Callan saw this and he sent him a message saying, "Don't do anything I wouldn't do," with a dancing skeleton. He didn't answer this. Jackson's mother said that she spoke with him on the last day that he was seen alive on July 22nd. She said everything seemed fine. He was his usual self. He told her he had never been happier and that he was hanging out with these beautiful, intelligent people. He was having a good time, just drinking beer, chilling, sitting on roofs, playing music, surfing, watching the sunset. But she tried calling him about 10 days later about a parking fine and he didn't answer. So she put about $300 in his bank account with a message to please call mom, and he never did. Now, when his mother actually got to Australia and went to this area, this was after the investigation, and she would find one of her son's teeth under a leaf. And that is when the thoroughness of the original search was questioned, and so a police line search was ordered, and they were forced to search on their hands and their knees, and that is when 3 small finger bones were found. Another friend of Jackson's, Mia, said that she had met Jackson on a commune in Queensland and that he was charismatic, energetic, and friendly. But she also stated that Jackson knew that psychedelics and marijuana were not agreeable with him. They put him on edge. Yet he was said to be smoking in Byron. Now, Jackson's parents, who were Sandra and Ian Stacker, believed that their son's death exposes Byron Bay's dark underbelly and that he fell victim to it. They theorized that he got involved with someone in the drug trade and maybe they left stuff in his van and that's why it was trashed. Then there was an altercation between Jackson and these people. His mother said that everything was so violent. The van wasn't just messy, it was destroyed. Cushion covers were taken off and the foam was actually ripped. His parents believed he was then chased from this area to the area where he was killed. And they also found that while his phone had never been recovered, the records showed that none of his friends in Byron Bay that he had made had attempted to contact him in the month between him dying and his body being found. There were no calls or texts from them, even though they were in touch multiple times a day prior to that. Now, those friends were allegedly later questioned by police and told them that Jackson had mood swings and he was troubled due to the drug use and that he was talking about at that time. His parents did confirm that Jackson had once been hospitalized in the past for a drug-fueled psychosis and that he wasn't against seeking help. He would openly talk about his troubles and he was against suicide. They were also certain that if that's what he was going to do, he would have written a note to say goodbye. That they knew about his mood changes in that last month, and he spoke about feeling used by people who were borrowing his van. But his mother also said that he was very open with her, and he would have told her about any dark thoughts he was having. It was like he didn't have a filter. His father, Ian, believes that the police assessment of Jackson was that he was homeless, he was an alcoholic drug user, and that assessment was made very quickly, that he was undervalued as a human being because of how he was found. Jackson's cousin Ishtar said that she'd even heard of things going on in Byron where young people have been very afraid because they are being forced to be involved in something. Now, 60 Minutes covered this case in 2024 and they revisited the crime scene in a miraculous event. The producer of the show stumbled across a half-buried phone at the scene. This was within eyesight of where Jackson's body had been found, but it has yet to be revealed who this phone belonged to. And I'm assuming if it was Jackson, we would have heard about this. Now, an inquest was ordered to determine whether Jackson had taken his own life or was met with foul play, and 2 officers who worked this case very early on had gone on extended sick leave, and another had left the force and refused to give evidence. The inquest began in February, and they heard that the police did not gather potentially relevant DNA evidence or CCTV footage at the time. They waited until September 29th, a month later, to gather CCTV, and by at that point, it was too late. They also did not get DNA from the vape, and the rest stop where his van was also found was not initially searched. Forensic pathologist Wolford said that he could not rule out the possibility that Jackson had been stabbed more than once, including to the back of the neck, but the decomposition made it impossible to determine. The knife found in his chest was a common type of knife that was found by people who were camping or living in a van like he was. But his laptop and camera were also missing. And an inquest into Jackson's death found that his death was inconclusive. Another possible murder unsolved. Now, during an interview with The Briefing, the Member of Parliament, Buckingham, the man who originally publicized that there were so many missing people in Byron Bay, he was asked why he chose to speak out now, and he stated that it was an absolute stain on our society to have all of these cases not solved and to have them so poorly investigated, that there were so many unsolved that have remarkable similarities among them, with the type of victim being similar and the MO of the perpetrator being similar. And he said with the cluster of these types of crimes in the same area, it's likely that they were done by the same person. Not all of them, but a lot. Now, he was asked about the criticism that he has received for speaking out, and he has been said to just be an alarmist, that he is just wanting to put people on edge, but he believes that there are so many unsolved cases and that a repeat offender is out there getting away with it. In fact, a criminologist has told him that it's highly likely for a repeat offender to be responsible for a significant number of those. He also spoke about how serial killer Ivan Milat was convicted of 7 murders in the area, but there was someone on the North Coast that had murdered as many or more and is still among them, or has died or has fled to a different country. But some of the victims' families, such as Narelle Cox, the first victim we spoke about, believe that Ivan Milat, the backpacker serial killer, was responsible for her disappearance. The family, like I said, had gotten a tip about her being dropped off by that truck driver on Brunswick Heads, and that's where Ivan was believed to be working at the time. So her family actually called police when they were working Ivan's case, and they told them the date and the time of her disappearance, and the police basically said that Ivan was signed into work at that time, so it couldn't have been him. But Narelle's family has found that Ivan was known to have other people sign him into work And he also had once been at the Grafton jail, which is where she vanished from, so he knew the area. A lot of people wonder if Ivan has even more victims and if he would be responsible for any of these 60 unsolved cases. But a girl named Emily Baby on TikTok spoke a little bit more about being from and living in Byron and the darkness she has seen within it.
I'm absolutely gobsmacked by the information that has just been coming out about Byron Bay. I used to live there, I worked there, I grew up there, I spent a lot of time there, and to be honest, I'm not fucking surprised. There's been many times that I've been out and there's definitely interesting creatures there, but I've been out and I've been uncomfortable and I've noticed certain energies around that area. I've always heard of stories, I've always heard of women being assaulted or going through problems and personal experiences and friends' experiences as well that have told me. It is actually insane. It is disgusting. And it's insane that that wasn't being brought to our attentions beforehand, because
Bodie on TikTok then spoke about how in mid-2024 he was staying in Byron with friends. These friends were two girls who were living alone normally, and a few weeks before his stay, Bodie was told that these girls had creepy anonymous notes and flowers left on their front door. And then one night, they heard rustling outside and saw a man outside of their window. Then Bodie said that when he was staying there, he was sleeping on the ground, and around 2 a.m. he woke up and saw a head peeking out of the curtain in the living room and was coming in through the window. And as soon as the man saw him, he ran away. He said that his friends had to move out shortly after.
I'm staying in a town where there is an alleged serial killer, and there's a good chance I met him. About 6 months ago, I was sleeping on the floor in my friend's house. At about 2 a.m, I just wake up. For no particular reason. I just wake up and I look to my right because there's a little bit of rustling. There is a head poked through those curtains in the early hours of the morning. That guy that poked his head through the curtain could be the same guy responsible for all of the people that have gone missing.
But the director of Australian Missing Persons Register, Nicole Morris, is concerned about the idea of a serial killer and how it could be harmful for investigations and the family of missing persons. She said it's dangerous to say all of these people were killed by one person because it means you're not investigating each individual disappearance or homicide. Though some have pointed out that these individual disappearances and homicide were not being investigated anyway. So what do you think? Is this the work of a serial killer, of multiple serial killers? Is there something more sinister going on here? Is it the lack of police force that is just causing a whole bunch of criminals to act out and to not be caught, and for this to be a very dangerous place to be? Overall, many people have said it's a very beautiful place, but you do have to be cautious if you are going to go there. I think it's very interesting that it took this member of parliament speaking out on the negligence of these cases and how they haven't been handled properly for all of this to come out. And it's said that the locals may have known that there were a lot of cases happening, but for a lot of people, especially around the world, but also in Australia, they had no idea. And I feel like that's something the public deserves to know, especially because that area is known for tourism. And these people are coming in having no idea about any of this. But thank you so much for listening. Come back every single Sunday at 9 a.m. CST for a new video. And I cannot wait to talk to you in the comments down below. Don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough. And I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.